die Scherben fällt. Denn heute daher uns Deutschland und morgen die ganze Welt. Wir werden weiter marschieren, wenn alles die Scherben fällt. Denn heute daher uns Deutschland und morgen die ganze Welt. Und die vom Kampfe in Trümmern die ganze Welt so auf. Das soll uns die Käufe krümmen, wir bauen sie wieder auf. Wir werden weiter marschieren, wenn alles in Scherben fällt. Denn heute gehört uns Deutschland und morgen die ganze Welt. Wir werden weiter marschieren, wenn alles in Scherben fällt. Denn heute gehört uns Deutschland und morgen die ganze Welt. Und mögen die Alten auch schelten, so lasst sie nun toben und schreien und kämpfen sich gegen Welten. Wir werden zum Sieger sein. Wir werden weiter marschieren, wenn alles in Scherben fällt.
Du, meine Arbeit für richtig hältst. Ob du glaubst, dass ich fleißig gewesen bin, dass ich gearbeitet habe, dass ich mich in diesen Jahren für dich eingesetzt habe, dass ich anständig meine Zeit verwendet habe im Dienste meines Volkes. Gib du jetzt deine Stimme ab. Wenn ja, dann tritt für mich ein, so wie ich für dich eingetreten bin.
Howdy, friends and family. My name is Carl Sanchez Medina. Today's film is called The Auschwitz Halfway House. I don't want to call this a prison because it was never called a prison. During the time that this was full of people who were really prisoners, although they weren't called prisoners, it was never called a prison. It was called a concentration lager. The German word for prison is Gefängnis, but this was never called a Gefängnis. In Germany, they had laws that gave everybody rights. If somebody's accused of a crime, they would have the same rights as people in the United States. They were allowed to have an expert in the law who would represent them and present their side of the story, that they're innocent. They had a right to retrial, a right to subpoena eyewitnesses who saw what happened. But these people didn't get any of those rights because this was never called a prison. It was called a concentration lager. Now, this word, concentration camp, is really a German word. The real word that people use in the United States to label a place for prisoners who have not done a crime or who are going to do a crime in the future is the word halfway house or mental hospital. So this was never called a prison. So this is why I call this a halfway house. The Germans, the Nazis, who ordered the Russian POWs to build this thing, were did not call the prisoners prisoners. The German word for prisoner is Gefangene. And the people here were never called Gefangene because they didn't get any rights. They were being held in protective custody to protect them from hurting themselves or hurting other people. So that's why it was called a place where they are gathered together, concentrated together, concentration camp. In the US, they don't use this word concentration camp because they use the word halfway house or mental hospital. At the end of World War II, many of the people who knew why these places were built had either committed suicide or they had been executed. So who was left to tell the story about how this protective custody center came about? Hitler had killed himself. Joseph Goebbels, he killed himself. Heinrich Himmler, he killed himself. He couldn't tell the story. The commandant of this place, Rudolf Höss, he was executed. He was executed two kilometers that way, about a mile that way, at the Stimmlager, Auschwitz 1, right over there. He was executed only a few feet from his office. His office was right there at Block 11 at the Stimmlager. So he couldn't explain how this idea of protective custody came about. The only one left was Hermann Goering. He hadn't yet killed himself. So at the Nuremberg trial, everybody wanted to know, where did the Nazis get this idea of protective custody? Where did they get this idea of holding people in custody, not because of a crime they have done in the past, but for a crime they were going to do in the future? In other words, people wanted to know, where did the Nazis get this idea of holding people captive only because they were in danger of hurting somebody or themselves at any minute? So the prosecution attorney at Nuremberg, at the Nuremberg trial, he asked Hermann Goering, asked him, Marshal Goering, where did this idea of protective custody came about? In other words, where did that idea of holding people in captive who have not done in the past and they were going to do a crime in the future, where did that come about? And Hermann Goering was very proud to say, I got the idea. I'm the only one that came up with this great idea of protecting Germany from people who were a danger to themselves and to other people, and they could end up killing thousands of people or themselves at any minute. And they said, oh, Marshal Goering, what a crazy idea. Where did this crazy, ridiculous idea come from? Before World War II, there were no laws in the body of German jurisprudence that said anything about protective custody or holding people captive because they're a danger to themselves and to other people. So how were you able to get the judges to accept this new body of jurisprudence that would hold people captive for crimes that they were going to do in the future? Hermann Goering said, oh, it's very easy. I got the idea from the United States of America. And then everybody in the courtroom exploded in laughter because it was such a crazy idea. And Hermann Goering says he got the idea from the United States. And people were surprised. So the idea of holding people captive because they're a danger to themselves and to other people, which is called protective custody, was an idea that was born in the USA. Born in the USA. So, America, the land where people are held in a prison, which is not a prison, it's a halfway house because of a crime, that they're going to do in the future. Wow. Only in America, folks. You can't get this kind of justice in Russia, folks. Only in America can they come up with such ideas. But this idea was perfect for Hermann Goering. So he said, I read these books from the United States, and it talked about people who are in danger of hurting somebody or themselves at any minute. So I thought we need to have this kind of law in Germany too. And he was able to convince the judges, hey, in the United States, if some stupid cop says that you're in danger of hurting somebody or yourself at any minute, the law in the United States says that that person must be held in protective custody. Protective custody means a mental hospital or a halfway house. They can't put them in prison because prison means, oh, you had a jury of your peers, your eyewitnesses who saw everything are allowed to testify, and your public defender, he's supposed to prove that you're innocent. He's not supposed to hire people like Deborah Mayora and Barbara C. Counter to write letters about how dangerous. Any cop can say, duh, Mr. Sanchez is going to kill himself and somebody at any minute. He's a danger to himself and to other people. Duh. So if a cop says that, the law in the United States said protective custody, halfway house, mental hospital, forever without a trial. And they can't have a trial because they're too stupid to know what a judge is. They're too stupid to know what a trial is. What? I speak English, I don't know. Yeah.
Me too, a little bit.
Okay. That's the way it is in the United States. What law did Hermann Goering find that made it legal to hold people custody for a crime they're going to do in the future? This law is called Section 5150 of Welfare and Institution Code, and the law still exists. They can, in the United States, they can legally hold you captive because you're going to do a crime in the future. I was held at Gateways for 11 months because the judge, Stephen Hillman, and Margaret Nagel had decided that I was very dangerous. I was going to kill somebody and myself at any minute. So just because the cop says I'm dangerous, and there were many of them, and because a judge says that I'm dangerous, even though I hadn't done a crime, it became 100% legal to hold me in Gateways for 11 months with horrible medication, and also at Metropolitan Detention Center. And that's known as a prison. That's where they had the famous murderer, Buford Furrow, in prison. So I don't know how they can say that Metropolitan Detention Center is a halfway house. It's used as a prison, so how can they say that that is a halfway house? And that is where I was held for 60 days from a commitment order from Margaret Nagel, and for another 30 days from Stephen Hillman. A total is 1 year, 2 months, and 3 days. Officially, my so-called crime was for passing out political literature on federal property. That was a lie. I never did that, not even one. I passed out the leaflets on a public sidewalk. But in the United States, they can put you in prison without any evidence other than the lies from a police officer. That is called freedom in the United States. And that's what Hermann Goering was doing. He was using the laws of the United States to justify what he was doing. And in Germany, these Nazis were held in prison for war crimes. And at first they were saying, oh, death sentence. And while they were on death row waiting to be executed, they started saying, we were just following U.S. law. We were not doing anything illegal under U.S. law. U.S. law says it's okay to hold people captive because they're a danger to themselves and to other people. And the judges in these courts, they agreed with the Nazis. They said, okay, even though your sentence is death, I changed your sentence, now life in prison. And then they say the same argument. I was following U.S. law. It was protective custody. They say that to the next judge in their next appeal. And the judge says, you're acquitted, you can go. And by the way, we need you to work as a CIA agent to spy on the Russians. So these Nazis, after they were finished working here, after they killed 2 million Jews in this place and the other Auschwitz camp, they were hired by the CIA. They became CIA agents. Only in America, folks. You can't get this kind of job in Russia, right? Okay, if you want to know more about the Nazi halfway houses, you can buy my book, The Mother of All Evidence, available at the Amazon Kindle store or through my blogs on Facebook, MySpace, or DeviantArt. You can find my web pages through my email address, paulrevere1776. And not only that, I'm also letting you know about a film that is already playing on YouTube that you can watch. It's called Exile in Paris. So if you would like to see different parts in Paris, you can click on to YouTube and watch my film. It's for free, and it's just like being in Paris. It has great music, and it has interesting ideas that I tell through this film. Okay, thank you for watching this film. You will be seeing not only this halfway house, but many other halfway houses in the Ukraine and in Germany. So this is where the train stopped. Very long trains. They stopped along this train track. And the people were ordered to get out. So all this area, you see, was crowded with thousands and thousands of people. And they were all confused. They didn't know where they were. They had never heard of this place. They didn't know what was going to happen. Some people suspected it. But most were told that they were just going to this work camp to work. But they were still scared. They were still afraid that something could happen. And while they were on the trains, they were cattle trains. They never had any seats, any place to sit down, and they were all squeezed together tightly. They couldn't even lie down, and they were held in these cattle cars for days sometimes, and no water. During this time that they were in these cattle cars, they didn't get any water. So after 2 days or a day, they were extremely thirsty. And when they came out of the trains and wandering through these huge crowds of people, they saw this fire prevention pool. And when they saw this, they crowded around to get a drink of water, even though you can see it's pretty muddy. But when you're that thirsty, you haven't had any water for 2 days, you're desperate. So they were kneeling here to get a drink of water, and they were so weak from not eating in the trains and so dizzy that they fell in and they drowned here, and nobody tried to help them. Nobody cared. Certainly the guards didn't. And after the people were sent that way to the gas chambers, the remaining drowned people were just taken out and their bodies taken either to the crematorium or to the fire pits where they were burned. I don't understand.
Just speaking English?
Yeah, yeah,
May I speak with you?
yeah.
It's private ceremony.
Uh-huh.
Please don't make.
Okay, I'm leaving.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. This is the main crematorium. And this is also the biggest. There are the first crematoriums that were used were way over there. They weren't very big, they were small. But they realized that it was taking too long to murder people with those little crematoriums. So they made this crematorium. It's like an industrial mass production of death kind of crematorium. And here, I think, is where the worst part of these massacres happened. There were a lot of massacres, but there's one massacre that really freaks me out more than the other massacres. It's the one that gives me the most nightmares, and that was the massacre of the Gypsies. Now, of course, the massacre of the Jews, of course, it was horrible, but what really gives me the nightmares is how the Gypsies were murdered. Their camp used to be right there. You don't see it because the Germans burned down the camp, and they didn't leave anything behind because the Nazis didn't want anybody to know that there was such a thing as Gypsies. They were expecting that in the future the Gypsies were going to be extinct and nobody would know that they existed. But what freaks me out is that during the time in which this crematorium was in operation, the Gypsies were watching everything from behind that fence, including children. So every day the Gypsies could hear the screaming, the panic from all the people being killed here. Children were watching, and they could even see the pit. The pit was near the crematorium. Perhaps it was over here. And the children could see little children, their age, being thrown into the pit alive. And this looks like it could be the pit where the people, the bodies were being thrown. You see, no matter how many gas chambers and crematoriums were built, they couldn't keep up with the piles, the huge piles of bodies to be burned. So they had to dig these pits to incinerate the excess bodies. Now here at the bottom in the basement, that was the gas chamber. Upstairs was the crematorium. And up on the attic were the living quarters for the Sonder commandos. The Sonder commandos were Jews that were forced to do the work of taking the bodies out of the gas chambers and taking them upstairs through this little elevator to the crematoriums where they were cremated. or bring the bodies here to the pit to be burned, because the crematoriums were busy 24 hours, non-stop. They never stopped burning. And the bodies were rotting, it was smelling bad, so the Sandra Commando brought the bodies here. And sometimes some children were found. The parents had hidden away in piles of clothes, and they didn't want to wait for the next transport to kill the kids, and there was no place to keep them, so they would throw them alive into the fire. And the Gypsy children were there watching the whole thing. So the worst part is that was the night of late October, and right now it's late October right now, of 1944. The soldiers came in the night, but none of the Gypsies went willingly, because every day they would see thousands of people going into this gas chamber and never come out. Even the children knew what was going to happen. Even the children had seen kids being thrown alive into the fire pit. Nobody believed any of that George Bush it about taking a shower. The soldiers chased the Gypsies like chasing a flock of flightless birds. The Gypsies kicked, scratched, and bit. They did anything to stay alive. The screaming lasted all night. Can you imagine how terrifying it was to the kids? Can you imagine how the kids felt when mom and dad could do nothing to help them? It must have been like the end of the world to see their parents being dragged away, kicking, biting, scratching, and screaming. In the morning, the Gypsy camp was quiet. Nobody was left. Whenever I have nightmares about the Gypsy massacre, I always see the faces of Judge Margaret Nagel and Stephen Hillman. The Gypsy massacre shows what hate can do. It shows that just being different or unusual is enough to fill people with horrible hatred. When I think of this kind of hatred, I always think about the frightful hatred I saw in the eyes of Margaret Nagel and Stephen Hillman. They did not want to hear the truth. They both said, "I am a judge. I have already ruled that your witnesses were not there at the time of the arrest. If I say that they were not there, then they were not there, because I say so." People full of hate never want to hear the truth. This is the sauna. In this place, women were brought here to have their hair shaven off, head hair and pubic hair. They had to be here nude, and their genitalia was inspected to see if they were carrying any valuables like jewelry or money. Over here is Canada. That's the name of this place. So all you have left now of Canada is just these foundations. But there were many buildings here. And Canada was used for sorting out the loot, the stolen property. There were millions and millions of people being brought here. And they were told that their property was going to be protected, and they had a special place for their property, and they would get it back when they leave. But of course, they were usually murdered at the gas chambers, and all of their things were brought over here to be sorted out, separated, and then put into boxcars of loot to be taken to Germany to be distributed amongst the Nazis who profited the most from the plunder of stolen property. And here is a medium-sized crematorium that was built when the smaller crematoriums could not keep up with the number of people being murdered. And so they built this one much bigger than the little crematoriums and gas chambers to try to keep up. But it wasn't big enough, so that's when they built that other mega structure that you've already seen, the mother of all crematoriums and gas chambers. And even here, there was too many bodies, piles of dead bodies and rotting away, and it couldn't cremate the bodies fast enough, even though the crematoriums were running at full blast day and night. So they dug a pit here, and here's where they were burning the excess bodies. When I see these gas chambers, it reminds me of Judges Stephen Hillman and Margaret Nagel, because the people being brought here were told, oh, you're going to take a shower. They had to take off all their clothes, and they had these fake showers, and the gas would come out, Zyklon B gas, and they were murdered. And it makes me think about the motion I made. I made a motion in federal court for a jury trial. I didn't want my fate to be decided from these two judges, Margaret Nagel and Stephen Hillman. I wanted a jury of my own peers to decide what was going to happen as a punishment for passing out political literature on federal property, which I didn't do. I just passed out the leaflets on a public sidewalk, which is 100% legal. And both Judges Hillman and Nagel said, Mr. Sanchez, your motion for a jury trial is denied because you're not facing any prison time. The crime of distributing political literature on federal property carries no prison penalty. And I believed it. I was very naive. I thought judges in the United States, if they say something, it's true. But that's when I learned a big lesson about the United States judicial system. The judges in the United States, the ones I have seen, are nothing but Nazis who lie to you to punish you even though you haven't done anything wrong. And after I was convicted for 10 cases of distributing political literature on a public sidewalk, both judges made a ruling while I was in prison, and they gave me the paperwork later on. The paper said, and you can read these papers by buying my book, The Mother of All Evidence, available through the Amazon Kindle store. And these documents said the penalty for distributing political literature on federal property carries a punishment of 30 days in prison for offense. So, the judges were lying. Stephen Hillman, Margaret Nagel are horrible freaking liars from hell. They only said this so that I wouldn't get a jury trial, so that they themselves could decide what would happen to me for this so-called crime of distributing political literature on federal property. And this is where I learned my lesson. You cannot believe the judges in the United States. They lie more than the LAPD. I thought that the LAPD were the worst liars in the United States, but now I realize that the judges were the worst liars. And they were just like these Nazis, lying to the people, saying that they're only going to take a shower. And that's a horrible lie. Now, this pond This whole area, look at all of this land. It used to be like 50 feet deep. This was kind of like it was a pond, but it was much bigger. It covered this whole area that you can see was a pond, and now this is the pond. This is all that's left of this huge pond. You know why? Because the ashes from so many people being incinerated there, they threw it in the pond, and they put it, kept doing this for years, ashes and ashes and ashes all around the edges of the pond, until the pond became this. So all of this land, look over here, all around the pond, there is, I'm standing on the ashes of dead people. There is a loam that is several feet deep where the lake used to be, and it's all ashes, the ash loam. As I'm walking, I'm feeling it like it's muddy. I feel my feet going squish into the mud. It's because of the ashes. It's the ash loam. All of this is dead people, so you would be able to find bones of dead people anywhere here in this area. By the end of World War II, there were approximately 50 Auschwitz camps. The first one is the Stimmlager, which is about a mile that way, just at the horizon. This is Auschwitz II, Birkenau, and that was the second camp to be built. After this camp was built, and it was filled with prisoners, many of the prisoners were chosen as slaves, and they were forced to walk from here through the main gate to work at the IG Farben factory and at the Siemens factory, which is 2 miles that way. Today, the factories still exist, but they're no longer owned by German companies. They are owned by Polish companies. The prisoners had to walk for 2 hours. By the time they arrived at the IG Farben company and Siemens, they were very tired, so they didn't get much work done. So that's why the Commandant, Rudolf Höss, ordered the prisoners to build another camp right there at the distance, right by the factories. And this camp was known as Monowitz, also known as Buna. This kind of reminds me of when I was a prisoner at Gateways. I was also forced to leave Gateways to go to a different place, a business called Portals, where I was forced to pick up cigarette butts, wash toilets, clean trash cans, pull out weeds, mow the grass, water the grass. When I was a slave, I was forced to do this. And then at the end of the workday, I had to come back to Gateways, where I was also a slave there and I had to work. This is what happened here. The prisoners were not free to go as they wished, but they were forced to go to different factories in the area to work as slaves. This place is called Płaszów. I call it the Płaszów halfway house. When I saw the film Schindler's List, and I saw how that woman was shot just because she said that one of the buildings was on a very poor foundation and the building would collapse. When I saw how Alman Gut was shooting the prisoners from the balcony of his villa, I thought all of that was happening in Auschwitz. But now I know that's not true. It happened here in Płaszów. And I just arrived from the other side of this camp, and I stopped at a McDonald's and I asked where Płaszów is, and they told me about 100 meters that way. So I came here, and on the other side is looks like a Costco. This is Castorama. It's amazing. One of the most horrible camps in history is right next to a Costco. It's like history meets the mundane. It's just so freaky. Now, like many of these camps, when they heard the guns of the Russians coming, the Nazis panicked and they began to destroy the evidence, burn down the barracks, blow up brick buildings, so on. So they blew up things that they had built to last for 1,000 years for this 1,000-year right, and then they're trying desperately to blow it up as soon as possible before the Russians come. And that's what happened here. Everything's gone. The Nazis try to destroy the evidence of something that they had built to last 1,000 years. They didn't know that they would have to destroy everything with only a deadline of only a day before the Russians arrived. So that was quite a task. But you know what? There's some things they couldn't destroy. Some of the evidence couldn't be destroyed. For example, the moat. This looks like a Viking fortress. I have seen many ruins of Viking castles or Viking fortresses, and there's nothing left because it was usually made out of wood, except for the moat. So here's the moat. And the berm. Here's the berm. Exactly like a Viking fortress. But this is not a Viking fortress. This is a Nazi halfway house. These halfway houses in Poland, in Germany, in Ukraine, Austria, they tend to remind me of Judges Stephen Hillman and Margaret Nagel, because they didn't want to hear the truth. They didn't want to look at the evidence. They didn't want me to have any evidence. They wanted me to go to prison from the very beginning. They weren't impartial. They didn't want to give me the benefit of the doubt. They just wanted me to go to prison so that I won't pass out any more leaflets on a public sidewalk. They just didn't want the public to know the horrible things that the U.S. government is doing domestically within the United States and abroad in foreign countries like Iraq and Afghanistan. So they were desperately trying to find any excuse to keep me in prison forever. So they didn't want the evidence to come out. So they said, Mr. Sanchez, you don't have any evidence to prove that you had passed out the leaflets on a public sidewalk. You don't have any evidence to prove that you didn't pass out the leaflets on federal property like the officer said you did. And I said, well, what about all my eyewitnesses? And Judges Stephen Hillman and Margaret Nagel, they said, well, I'm the judge. I have already ruled that all of these witnesses were not there. And if I rule that they were not there, then they weren't there. So this judge knew that I had many eyewitnesses, but they didn't want my eyewitnesses to tell the truth. They wanted to destroy the evidence. They just wanted to say, oh, you don't have any evidence because I say that these people weren't there. So they were not eyewitnesses, and you don't have any evidence because I'm the judge and I say you don't have any evidence. It's the same thing the Nazis did. Just try to destroy the evidence. At the time when they had these things, they built it to last. It's going to last 1,000 years. But when the Russian comes, destroy the evidence. And don't listen to people who want to tell you that there was evidence. Look, here's the entrance to the stronghold. Right here. It's enclosed by the berm. Read my book, The Mother of All Evidence. The main theme of my book is about how the U.S. government doesn't want to hear the truth. They always say, you don't have any evidence. But when you present them the evidence, they say it's irrelevant. When I used to go to, they used to put me in the mental hospitals, and they still do every time I go to the United States, I always end up in a mental hospital. The psychiatrists say, I don't want to look at your evidence. I don't want you to look, I don't want to listen to your witnesses. Go take your witnesses to a judge. I'm not a judge, I'm a doctor. My job is to make you feel better. My job is to feel wonderful. So the psychiatrists don't want to look at the evidence, and the judges don't want to look at the evidence. So that tells me Uncle Sam doesn't want to hear the evidence. Look at the cover of the book. There's a picture of Uncle Sam covering up his ears and going la 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 la. La 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 la, so that he will not look at all the evidence. The evidence is in front of him, but he doesn't want to look at the evidence. This is what I'm trying to say in my book. I want to say the evidence is everywhere, but the U.S. government does everything to destroy the evidence, hide the evidence, and refuses to look at the evidence. How do they refuse? By saying, you don't have any evidence. I can't help you. You don't have any evidence. And they never look at the evidence. They never open up these pamphlets with all the evidence. They never listen to the eyewitnesses. And this is what they did. Here, no buildings, no barracks, no crematorium. Hundreds of thousands of people here were killed. And the Nazis did everything possible to destroy the evidence. And if you tell them, well, what's that ditch all around this place? What's that berm? Isn't that evidence? They'll tell you, no, it's not evidence. You know what? This monument, it looks like a Russian monument. This monument is probably built by the Russians. I expected to see some Russian letters here, and there isn't. But because it's so big, it's like the same kind of monument, the same style that I've seen in many halfway houses. It looks like it was done by the same guy, the same people that made the Babi Yar monument and the monument at Sachsenhausen. I think that this is a monument from made by the Russians. And so they said, hey, you got to remember what happened. Something happened here. A lot of people were killed. This is a murder scene. And, a murderer tries to clean up the evidence. But if the police want to look at the evidence, if the police don't cover up their ears and say, la, 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 don't tell me about the evidence, they will find the evidence. So, yeah, the barracks are all gone. but some of the evidence is still here. They can't destroy this. Now, I think that Amengut's villa was right up there on those hills, and you can't see them. You can't see the villa. It's still there. You can't see the villa because it's covered up by those trees. But during the time when this halfway house was in operation, there was no grass. It was mud. All those hills didn't have any trees. It was all mud. So Amengut could see the camp from up those hills. And he had this telescopic rifle, and he would shoot at anybody who was taking a break, resting for a little while to catch his breath while doing very hard work, and shoot that person who isn't pushing his wheelbarrow fast enough. Next thing you know, you have thousands of people running. He caused a stampede. People running with their wheelbarrows, afraid of getting shot for moving too slow. I've been walking all over this neighborhood. I went all around the perimeters of the Płaszów halfway house. I've been asking people all over the place, where is Amengut's villa? The guy that used to shoot people from the balcony of his home. And people tell me that it's the oldest house you can find, and it has a for sale sign on it. So this is the oldest house I could find. All the other houses are too new, too modern to be built from the time of World War II. So this is the only house that looks old enough to be from the times of World War II. When Amengut's villa was built, it was the only house in this area. This place was in the middle of nowhere. There weren't any shopping centers or no McDonald's. It was just out in the boonies. And they built this house just for him. And you can't see a balcony here because the balcony is on the other side. And the Płaszów halfway house is on the other side of this house. So we're up on a hill. You see, it kind of goes like uphill. That's a little bit higher, but it's up on a hill, so he had a view of the whole death camp from the balcony of this house. And he used to shoot people with his telescopic rifle from up here down to the death camp, which is on the other side of this house. This is the first time in my life I have been right in front of a house of a commandant of a horrible death camp. When I first passed by this house, it looked exactly like the house, except that I couldn't see the brown door, the main entrance. And so I went around the side, and here it is, a brown door, exactly as it's supposed to be. I didn't think it was on the side. I thought it was right in the center. So the balcony must be over there on the other side. And I'm not allowed to go over there to film it. But anyway, the death camp is right behind this house. So far in this film, I have been very self-righteous about racists and about their shameful iniquity. Yes, indeed, I've been truly talking the talk, but do I walk the walk? Can I dare to compare myself to Oskar Schindler? This is the factory of the great German hero, Oskar Schindler, who gave up his great wealth just to save over 1,000 Jews. Am I as colorblind as Oskar Schindler? When Hillary Clinton was running for presidential candidate, a journalist asked her, "Are you black enough?" So now I must answer this question. Am I black enough? Or am I racist against white people? If you read my book, The Mother of All Evidence, you will read my opinions about WASPs. It est white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. For the last 25 years, I have had many temptations to think that all white people are evil. Almost every day, I argue with myself about this question. Almost every day, I argue with myself that the white race is the cruelest and most evil race in the world. When such thoughts fill my mind, I always counter such ideas by thinking about Oskar Schindler, who gave up his millions and this huge factory to buy the lives of over 1,000 Jews. I also think of my many white friends in Sweden, Denmark, France, etc., who have helped me so much, so many times. However, all this considered, the preponderance of evidence to prove that U.S. WASPs are the most evil people in the world is overwhelming. I built a house, a large house, in a suburb of Riverside, California. The county of Riverside kept doubling my taxes every year until I could no longer afford the taxes. The county sold this home at an auction without telling me anything about it. The man who bought this house changed all the locks in my home and threw me out without letting me keep any of my personal property. Although I had an eyewitness who testified in court about my furniture, lamps, beds, refrigerator, microwave oven, tools, electric saws, electric drills, concrete mixer, etc., the judge ruled that this eyewitness was not enough evidence that all that personal property is mine. The judge was white, and the man who kept all my property was also white. The people who kept doubling my taxes were also white. While swimming at Imperial Beach, California, I was ordered out of the water by the authorities. Since I didn't have any ID at the time, I was charged with the crime of illegal immigration. I told Judge Jack Stanton that I am a U.S. citizen and I demand the right to discovery and to subpoena documents that would prove that I am a U.S. citizen. Judge Jack Stanton ruled that since I've been charged with the crime of illegal immigration, I do not have any rights under the U.S. Constitution. Therefore, he said, my motion to discovery or public counsel is denied. After waiting 6 weeks in prison, Judge Jack Stanton ruled that I had a right to a trial and that this trial was set for next Tuesday. So I waited my 7th week in prison. On Tuesday, the judge asked again, "Do you still say that you are a U.S. citizen?" "Yes," I said. "Very well," he said. "Your trial is set for next Tuesday." So I waited my 8th week in prison. The next Tuesday, Judge Jack Stanton asked again, "Do you still say that you are a U.S. citizen?" "Yes, of course," I said. "Very well," he said. "You shall have your trial next Tuesday." So then I waited my 9th week in prison. So this was my routine every Tuesday. But I never received this trial. I was held in these 3 U.S. prisons for 3 months. Judge Jack Stanton is white. In 2010, I was held
in custody at the Alamo Behavioral Health Care Center for being homeless and for having only $8 in my pocket. I told the judge I have a lot of evidence that the officers are lying. I told her to get my passport with my many visas from France, Poland, Germany, the Ukraine, Sweden, Denmark, etc. to prove that I am not homeless. The judge said nothing. She just smiled at me. I told her to look in the safe and look at my airline ticket to prove that I've just arrived from Paris and Kiev, Ukraine. She just smiled at me. Then I asked her to look in the safe, to look at my ATM card to prove that I have an account with thousands of dollars. She just smiled at me. Then she ruled that I had to be held at the Alamo for 14 days for being homeless. The judge is white. Judge Stephen Hillman and Margaret Nagel, who refused to listen to the truth from my eyewitnesses, are also white. In spite of all this, there are too many people like Oskar Schindler that prove that not all white people are as evil as the U.S. judges that I have known. This is a typical Nazi death camp in the Ukraine. There aren't any buildings here. No barracks, no gas chambers, no crematoriums. And this is strange to me. But this death pit here in Kiev, Babi Yar, is the typical of the death camps in all the Ukraine. I have been studying other death camps such as Ostrov, Pinsk, Duvno, even Lvov, which used to be part of Poland. Now it's part of the Ukraine, and it's the same. There's just a pit. And my opinion about why the death camps are so different here in the Ukraine is because of the Gauleiter. Adolf Hitler used to believe in letting his henchmen do things their way. Adolf Hitler said, if you let your supervisors, managers do what they want, things have a way of working themselves out by themselves. So basically he told the Gauleiters, just get rid of the Jews. I don't care how, just get rid of them. So each Gauleiter had their methods. So in Poland, where you find many of the death camps such as Auschwitz, Płaszów, Majdanek, and so on, the Gauleiter was Hans Frank, and his method was barracks and crematoriums and gas chambers. And the same thing in Germany with Goebbels. He was the Gauleiter in Berlin. But here it's different. It must be because of Rosenthal. He was the Gauleiter, and he was more pragmatic about it. He just said, make them dig a pit and shoot them. They used to line them up right here at the edge, and then the soldiers would stand right here behind them and shoot them in the back of the head. They would fall into this pit, and then they would be burned, and they were covered up, whatever didn't burn. Don't forget to read my book, The Mother of All Evidence, available through Amazon's Kindle store or through my blog on Facebook, DeviantArt, and MySpace. You can find my blog for my other films through my email address, paulrevere1776@gmail.com. So now I'm going to show you the final solution to the Jewish question here at the pit of Babi Yar in the city of Kiev in the Ukraine. According to the Columbia Guide to the Holocaust, about 34,000 Jews were murdered here. The first murder began in September 29th in 1941, and the killings continued. However, most of the people murdered here were not Jews. A total of 100,000 people were murdered here, and so the Jews were really the minority of the people that were killed here. When I first I heard of Babi Yar I was a teenager. I saw the film Winds of War, and they told the story of Babi Yar, and I didn't understand how people could hate Jews. I understood racism in the United States. Of course, there are a lot of racism in California, but that kind of racism is towards Mexicans and black people. That is very normal in California, but I had never seen any Jews in California, or not in Los Angeles, or not in the neighborhoods where I was raised. So I didn't understand what anti-Semitism was about, because I compared everything towards hatred towards black people and Mexicans or Hispanics, and so I couldn't understand how racism was possible, because in the United States people hated black people, Mexicans, because white people think that they're stupid. One friend of mine said that Jimmy Carter shouldn't give the Panama Canal to the Panamanians because Panamanians are too stupid to know how to run the canal. They wouldn't know how to work it. And that's ridiculous, because now the Panamanians are building a canal much bigger than the one built by the United States. So this is why I couldn't understand how these Germans, Nazis, and the Vichy French, and even Joseph Stalin, who also murdered millions and millions of Jews, how could they believe that Jews are inferior? I thought the smartest people in the world are Jews, like Albert Einstein, Leo Szilard, the physicists, the ones who built the bomb. They were Jewish. So I didn't understand until I came here. Until I came to Kiev in 2006. And I didn't learn about it by studying about Jews. It was an epiphany that happened when I first discovered a myth. A myth about something stupid. That's the way racism is. It's a myth that makes no sense, that is completely stupid. And the myth that I saw here had nothing to do with Jews. The myth was about Coca-Cola. And it began like this. The year that I arrived, I went to the market and I bought 2 bottles of Diet Coke. Here in Europe, it's not called Diet Coke, it's called Coca-Cola Light. And when I bought it, I put it on the checkout counter. And there's this woman who looked startled. And she was babbling in Russian. At that time, I didn't know not very much Russian. I was just beginning to study Russian. So I didn't understand what she was saying, but she was very excited. She said, yada, yada, yada. And she kept on pointing to the bottles of Coca-Cola Light. And I thought she was crazy. So I went to, the next day I went to my Russian class. And I asked my Russian teacher, what does yada mean? She told me it means poison. And I was very confused. Poison? It's only Coca-Cola. How can people be afraid of Coca-Cola? But she told me that Coca-Cola is poisonous. It's made out of gasoline and CO2 gases, which are very, very poisonous. And it turned into an argument. A few weeks later, I accidentally dropped a little bit of Coca-Cola onto my hand, and my Russian teacher screamed and says, "Oh no, you're gonna get Coca-Cola burns on your hand." And she ran, got a tissue paper, and immediately started wiping off the Coca-Cola from my hand. And I was very surprised that she thought that my hands were going to burn from the Coca-Cola. And she said, "Be careful. If it gets on your clothes, it'll cause white spots all over your black pants." I thought, from Coca-Cola? It didn't make sense. And I didn't want to argue anymore with her, because I already spent too much time on my class arguing about that Coca-Cola is not dangerous. It's just sugar water. But I asked some of my students, what's this about Coca-Cola? Why are people scared of Coca-Cola here in Ukraine? And they said, well, it's because everybody knows it's dangerous. If you put meat into a cup of Coca-Cola, the meat will dissolve immediately. I thought they were joking. It didn't make sense. But everybody looked at me, serious. I laughed. But everybody looks at me, stares at me, wondering why I'm laughing. I'm laughing. To them, I was laughing about something very dangerous. And I couldn't believe it. I went to I had another class at the other side of town. It was a business English class. Executives. I thought, well, they're very executives, so they should make sense. They could explain to me what's this about Coca-Cola being poisonous and dangerous. And one of the students at the business class said, well, if Coca-Cola is great for cleaning clothes, if you have dirty clothes and you want them to be very white, just put Coca-Cola and it'll become totally white. And I was very amazed. How is it possible that almost the whole country can have the same myth about Coca-Cola? Something that's innocent and as harmless as Coca-Cola. Everybody in the United States knows that Coca-Cola is harmless. Even the Mormons drink Coca-Cola. The Mormons will not drink beer. They won't drink any form of alcohol. They won't even drink coffee. But if the Mormons drink Coca-Cola, how can it be dangerous? Then that's when it started to sink in about the myth, the power of myth. That was what had happened in Europe, especially in Germany and parts of France, like 25% of the population in France, the Vichy French, and in Russia, and here in the Ukraine, just 50%, 25% of the public believed that the Jews were dangerous. That if there's a plague or disease, the Jews are spreading the disease. That if there's an economic crisis, the Jews did it because they own the banks. If there's inflation, the Jews caused it. If a bank goes out of business or several banks go out of business, the Jews cause it because they own all the banks. Germans were indoctrinated to believe that every war that Germany had lost was because of the Jews. So to them, not all of them, you know, like 50%, to them, it's the Jews that caused Germany to lose World War I. And it's all a myth. Just like the Coca-Cola myth. Nobody wanted to do an experiment. I did the experiments. I showed my students. I put the meat in the Coca-Cola. It didn't dissolve. I got a rag. I put it in the Coca-Cola. It didn't turn white. And my students were shocked. But when you have 50% of the population, and that 50% gets elected, and they become the leaders of Germany, then they have the power to indoctrinate. They have the power over all films and newspapers and magazines, and they can make the rest of the public believe in a myth that is totally ridiculous, and nobody will do an experiment to find out if it's true or not. Okay, what about the myth in your country? So what about your country? Doesn't your country have some sort of ridiculous myth that doesn't make any sense? How do you know? If you know, if it's a myth that everybody believes, then you believe it too. Because this is a myth that you heard in your childhood, that you watched many times on TV, that your teachers told you was true, your parents told you that it's true, and nobody told you anything different. Nobody ever gave you a different point of view. That's all you know. So how do you know that it is a myth? You never tried to experiment to find out if it's true or not. You believed it because everybody believes it. I don't know how it is in your country, but in the United States, where I was educated, the greatest myth, in my opinion, is the myth that the United States is the land of the free and the home of the brave. It was only a few months ago when I went to visit my family in the United States. As usual, a police car was following me around along with my niece. This is familiar when I go to the United States. Sometimes only one police car is following me, sometimes two, sometimes three. And one time in Azusa, California, while coming from the forest, 5 police cars were following me around. Now, if it's the land, if it's the home of the brave, then why are so many cops following me around? I am suffering from kidney disease. I'm not very strong. I have difficulty climbing upstairs, and I am in favor of gun control. I am against civilians having guns. I'm against even hunters that use guns, because there's no need for hunters. They can go to the store, buy food, and it's much quicker, much faster, and really much cheaper to buy food in the supermarket than to go hunting down animals that are very scarce and hard to find. And yet the police arrested me and my niece. Now, if they weren't scared of me, somebody who doesn't have any guns, who is very much against guns and gun collectors and very much in favor of gun control, then were they afraid of my niece? She was just 6 years old, and all we did was sit in the shade of the tree. It was it was hot. It was the summer. And the temperature there at the time was 120 degrees Fahrenheit. I looked up in my phone what is 120 degrees Fahrenheit. It says that it equals 48.8 degrees Celsius. That's how hot it was. And my niece said, please, Uncle, I need to get to the shade because it's hot. I said, no, we're just going to the Jack in the Box. This won't take long. There's air conditioning in the Jack in the Box. And she said, well, I feel dizzy. And I was afraid that she might pass out. And I didn't have a telephone at the time. I couldn't call the police or an ambulance. So I said, okay. We sat down under a tree. And this was in front of a wall, a high wall, 6-foot high wall, and the houses were much lower down. Nobody could see that we were there, but somebody called the police and had us arrested for loitering. As we walked, that's when the police car started following me around, and then they arrested us, put my niece in the police car, put me in a different police car, because they were afraid that we were going to do something dangerous. Is that the home of the brave, or is that the home of the cowards? To me, people who have to have an arsenal of guns are not brave to me. They're cowards. If they're brave, why do they need to carry so many guns? Why are they trying to get rid of Barack Obama because he's advocating gun control? Now, what about land of the free? Okay, it was, I think, 3 years ago. I was arrested as soon as I arrived at the airport. I was arrested because the officer said that I only had $8 in my pocket. I told them I have much more than $8. They wanted me to tell them how much I had, but I chose the Fifth Amendment. I have enough money, but I'm not going to tell you how much. And then they wanted me to give them a home address where I was going to stay in the United States. And I chose the Fifth Amendment. I said, no, I'm not going to tell you my address. So they arrested me for being homeless and for having only $8 in my pocket. When I arrived at the mental hospital, I had a discussion with Dr. Peter Hirsch about why I was arrested. And he said, I ended up saying that the United States is the most tyrannical, despotic country in the world. And because of that, he wrote a paper. It was like evaluation that said that I was confused, that I had disorganized thoughts, and that paper made me stay, caused me to stay in that mental hospital for 14 days with medication, horrible medication, forced into me. And that Dr. Peter Hirsch was trying to prove to me that the United States is not the most tyrannical and despotic country in the world. Dr. Peter Hirsch tried to prove to me that the longer he punishes me in the mental hospital, the longer he keeps me a prisoner, the more he drugs me with horrible medication, the more he makes me suffer, the more he is tyrannical and despotic against me, the more evidence he will present to me that the United States is not the most tyrannical and despotic country in the world. And that's liberty in the United States. And that is supposed to be liberty, the home of the free and the home of the brave. This is the Ravensbrück halfway house. It was a halfway house specifically for women.
This is the town of Fürstenburg. It is about 1 hour train ride from downtown Berlin. This halfway house was liberated by the Russian army in early May of 1945. The Sachsenhausen halfway house was liberated after Ravensbrück was liberated, because it took the Russians much longer to get to Berlin, because, well, that's where most of the fighting was taking place. So it was much harder to liberate Sachsenhausen than it was to liberate Ravensbrück. The people who lived in this area, especially at the beginning of the time in which this was a halfway house, didn't exactly realize what was going on. They were told that these were dangerous women, that these were dangerous political prisoners. Some of them were Russian partisans. Some of them were captured fighting against the German army by sabotaging railroad tracks, bombing things. So they were dangerous as far as the Germans were concerned. However, most of them were just because they were here because they were Jews, no other reason. Some of them were political prisoners. Some of them were German women who believed that the Nazi regime was evil, was wrong, and that they didn't want to play a part in the Nazi crimes. And for that reason, they were sent here to a women's prison. So I don't think that these Russian women who were helping to fight the Germans were criminals. I think they were heroes, and they were doing a lot to stop the Nazis from doing the horrible things they were doing. But the people who lived in the nearby village of Fürstenburg, to them they were dangerous. That's what they were told. Towards the end of the war, rumors began about the horrible things that were happening here. Some of the things that are still stuck in my mind about what they did here, were things such as they made the women use a trough to defecate, a long trough. So the trough was filled with excrement, human excrement. And whenever a woman was disrespectful or causing trouble, the women guards would get her head, shove it into the trough, into the feces, and keep her there until she drowned of feces. There was horrible things going on constantly here, all the time, as all these death camps were. And I think what scared the women more were the dogs. They used an awful lot of dogs because the staff was needed to fight the enemies, especially the Russians and the Russian front. So they couldn't have very many soldiers here. They needed these soldiers to go out and fight. And the women were easier to control than men, because women tend to scare or panic more so than the men. And well, at least that's what the Germans believed. And they believed that they could get the job done much more if they had a lot of dogs, because the women were very terrified of the dogs. Women are slightly smaller than men,
and so they are more in danger of being hurt by large dogs. So they had a lot of large dogs, and they used the dogs here more than any of the other camps, specifically because the prisoners were women and had a natural fear of dogs, big dogs. One woman described that there was a parade of women passing by, and one of the Russian women panicked. She had a panic attack and was very afraid of something. Perhaps she was afraid that they were taking them to the gas chambers to be gassed, because they knew about it. The ashes from the dead bodies were all over the place. The children didn't understand, in the neighboring towns, didn't understand what are all these ashes doing all over the place, and why there's smoke coming from the chimney. And the parents would tell them, well, they're burning clothes. The people that go into the concentration camp, they're very dirty, and their clothes is full of lice, so it has to be disinfected, and they're just burning their clothes. But anyway, this column of women were being taken, and a Russian woman panics. She runs away. There's no place for her to run away, and the dogs were released immediately. According to witnesses, her arm, one arm was literally, the women say, torn off of her body. That's hard to believe, but that's what the women say. Another thing that strikes me in my mind, that doesn't go away, is how these women were paraded in the downtown Ravensbrück and forced to sing. And the people could see the prisoners. They were also forced to work everywhere in the town, cleaning sewers and sweeping the streets, doing all kinds of chores, building roads and so on, all over the place. And the people knew that they were prisoners. But what strikes me the most is how people were saying, they're just prisoners. They did something wrong. They're all criminals, and they deserve what they're getting. And people don't know the truth, what's going on here. A few of the women were partisans, and to me they were heroes, but most of them posed no threat to anybody. They were there because they were Jewish. They were there because they opposed the German government. And it kind of hurts to think that nobody sympathized for these women. They just assumed that they're criminals, they deserved what they got. So things like this really stir me up, because I think of the time that I was a prisoner at Metropolitan Detention Center. I was just passing out political literature on a public sidewalk, and I had to wear an orange outfit with the words county prison on the back. And so I was taken on a bus to different, like the courthouse, and right there on the streets of Los Angeles, I had to walk, and people would look at us and say, oh, they did something wrong. Look, they're wearing orange uniforms. They're criminals. And the people don't think that I didn't get a jury trial. My eyewitnesses were ruled irrelevant. And my public defender used federal money to hire these expert witnesses to secretly, behind my back, write letters to the judges and saying that I'm very dangerous, I'm going to do some horrible crime. So how could these people say that these prisoners deserve what they get? So if I see, sometimes I've seen it in France, I've seen it here. I've seen it here in Berlin. I saw a man raising a ticket for a bus, and then a bunch of cops grabbed him and put his hands, handcuffed him, and put him against the wall, kicked his feet apart, and searched him. And I'm thinking, he's probably innocent. This is the police. They always do that to innocent people, because that's what they did to me. And I was shocked when I saw some gypsy women yelling at the man for having stolen the ticket from them. And I could understand, he's guilty, I guess. But for me, the guilt of somebody being arrested takes a long time for it to sink in. When I see somebody on the street being arrested, I think, here's another innocent person being arrested and accused of something he didn't do. He won't get a jury trial. His eyewitness will be ruled irrelevant, and his public defender, his lawyer, is going to say all kinds of lies. He's going to hire somebody to say all kinds of lies about this innocent person, that how he's dangerous. And it hurts me to think that these women were totally innocent, and yet the public was led to believe that they must have done something wrong because they were in prison. Something was there. I don't know what, but something has been yanked out of that wall. And even though I don't know what was there, it reminds me of a woman I saw on the beaches of the Mediterranean, on the French Riviera. I was walking along the beach, and I saw this young lady wearing a bikini. She's wearing this black bikini. And then I saw above her black bikini bottom, I saw an emblem of the German eagle tattooed on her butt right above the bikini. Now, I have seen a lot of World War II movies, and I've seen that emblem of the German eagle, and I know that the eagle is supposed to be holding on to a ring or a circle with a swastika on it. But I didn't see the swastika. The swastika was a mystery because the part of the swastika was covered up by the panty. And the only way to see if she had a tattoo of the swastika on her butt was to pull down her bikini bottoms. Well, I think that's sort of like a metaphor of shame. I think that there are some German people who are ashamed of that swastika, and I think also it's illegal, and they don't want to be reminded of it, and so something that was very highly respected in Germany has been torn out. So it only leaves a mystery. What used to be there? Or what kind of tattoo is under that bikini bottom? This is the grand entrance. I don't think it's as impressive as the grand entrance as Auschwitz Birkenau or Sachsenhausen. It looks pretty plain, but I can imagine how crowded this was with thousands of women being brought here to be processed. And they had to march through this main entrance. And I suppose that the little door was for the guards to go in and out so they wouldn't have to get near the column of prisoners or the trucks that would sometimes come here full of prisoners. And this is the guard shack, kind of big, where the soldiers would be standing, waiting to kill somebody if they tried to escape or get out of line. Whenever I see a gravel area in any of these death camps or halfway houses, I always grab on a handful of the rocks to see if they're heavy. You know why? I'm kind of worried that if they're not heavy, then they're human bones. And it's kind of scary to think that I'm walking on human bones, crushed bones. I'm hoping that whatever crushed bones used to be here have been removed and replaced with real rocks. Because if this were human bones, it would be quite a scary sight, wouldn't it? No, this is not a ash pit. Unfortunately, there are no ashes of dead people here. Is what's left of the huts, the work huts that used to be here. These huts didn't have a foundation. That's why you don't see any concrete. They were very cheaply made huts. They were like factories. This is where the women worked as slaves, slave labor. The lucky women, the ones that were not so lucky, they ended up getting cremated in the crematorium. It's interesting that the women were not called slaves. They were called Häftlinge. Häftlinge means ward, somebody who's being protected. And what their work they were doing wasn't called slave labor. It was called work development. This word work development is very similar. It sounds like vocational training. I looked up gateways on the internet to try to understand their side of the story, why they made me work so hard, why did they turn me into a slave, why did I have to work from sun up, even past sundown, why did I have to even work in the darkness, sweep the grounds in the dark? Why did I have to work Saturday and Sunday early in the morning to late at night? And the reason is vocational training. You see the webpage, Gateways. They say that they have excellent vocational training, excellent recreational activities, very fun, exciting recreational activities, and expert counseling. Well, I was there, and what they mean by expert counseling is a man tells you, look, you signed this confession, you signed that you really did pass out political literature on federal property, and that you're aware that you are suffering from a horrible illness that has totally ravaged your mind, and you'll get out. Your confession will convince the doctors, like Dr. Chaska. He was like the Dr. Mengele of Gateways. It'll convince Dr. Chaska that you are recovering from your illness, that you are aware that you did a horrible crime by passing out leaflets on federal property. And if you sign this confession, it'll prove to Dr. Chaska that you are responding to the medication, and then he'll have to release you. That was the expert advice. But I wouldn't sign. I was like the Bibelfasche of this place. There were women here who refused to sign a paper saying that they will fight for Hitler, they support Hitler. They refused to sign the paper. And that's why they were kept here as slaves. And it was very simple for these Bibelfasche women to get out. All they had to do was sign a paper and they would be out. But they had principles. They had morals. They were not going to prostitute themselves to Adolf Hitler and sign that paper. It's like signing your soul to the devil. These women would not sign their soul to the devil. So that's why I wouldn't sign the paper that they gave me at Gateways. Other prisoners did. They signed the paper, but they weren't released. Now, what about that famous recreational activities? Well, maybe it's over there. Maybe some prisoners were allowed to play soccer or something. But in Gateways, some people played football. But I couldn't play football because of the medication. The medication that they forced me to take made it almost impossible for me to walk. It made me an invalid. I could only walk a few inches at a time. And I had to carry this heavy vacuum cleaner. When you're sick like that with that medication, that vacuum cleaner feels as heavy as a Harley Davidson. And I couldn't, if I could barely walk. For me, recreation activity was walking from my, from Shangri-La, the cabin where that little house where I lived, to the Fuhrer bunker. That was my recreation activity. There's no way I could run. I couldn't play football. Now, as far as the famous vocational training, this is where the women were doing their vocational training. These were factories. At this time, Germany needed a lot of equipment for the war. Bombs, bullets, gas masks, helmets, all kinds of equipment for the army. And the women were making it here. These were crude huts. They didn't even have a foundation. Probably the floor was all sagging because of like when it rained and movements from the ice when it would freeze in the winter. But they weren't paid. But to the outside world, they're lucky to be here. Hey, you are lucky to live in Germany. In Germany, you have the right to get a free education, free vocational training. And if you didn't live in Germany, you wouldn't be getting this excellent vocational training. Yeah, like the vocational training I had to do at Gateways. Cleaning toilets, picking cigarette butts from the grass, sweeping the sidewalks, sweeping all the huts, and cleaning my hut, and also the Fuhrer bunker. I had to clean that, mop and sweep. People must have thought I'm a janitor. I get paid. I didn't get paid anything. I was a slave. That's what these women were doing here. This is a prison block located right next to the crematorium. So this is where the women were held just before they were executed, before they were gassed. Today the cells have been converted to exhibition facilities. But this was this was a cell that had iron right here. There was iron bars, and the women were packed here, very overcrowded. The Commandant said that he always had a problem, that as soon as he found space for the women, they would send them thousands more, and he could not keep up with the overcrowding problem. Here you can see how the original doors look like. You see this door? They have it in the United States too. This little door, that's where they give you your food. And it's covered up, but it used to have a peephole. All these prison doors had peepholes, but it's been covered up. So it gives you an idea how it looked when it was overcrowded with prisoners. Remember I told you that they had steel bars? Yeah. As well as the door right there. See the bed? Iron bars. The bed's made out of steel. It's like Metropolitan Detention Center. Metropolitan Detention Center, it had this sheet metal, and you had to lie on a piece of sheet metal. I was there for 3 months. All I did was pass out political literature on a public sidewalk. And for that, they decided I was very, very dangerous. Okay, I'm not passing out leaflets anymore. Okay, fine. So now I'm making films instead. Maybe that will make them happier than the leaflets I was passing out. Maybe they don't mind the films. They sure didn't mind the leaflets, piece of paper people used to throw away, and almost nobody would accept my leaflets. So now I wonder how many people are going to be watching this film. Very similar to Metropolitan Detention Center where they left me, where they kept me. Small room, about this size, and they let you have a toilet in front of everybody and a sink. That little sign over there says that this is the place where the roller used to be. And it says that the roller was used by the prisoners to pave the roads. They were forced to work, they were slaves. However, I don't think this foundation was built just to hold a 6-foot high roller. There's something funny going on here. I don't believe that roller story. Maybe there was a roller up here, but I think there was a building here. See that wall? They didn't build that big heavy wall for nothing. It was used for something. And this is the foundation of large building. The
the map says that this is where the gas chamber used to be. And I've chased down one of the workmen, the people that work here, taking care of the grounds. And they tell me that the crematorium, the gas chambers were destroyed by the Nazis when they heard the Russians coming. That's the usual method. The Russians come, blow up the evidence, and the most incriminating evidence is the gas chamber. Now the crematorium, they can say, well, there were epidemics, people got sick, and there was thousands and thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of women here, and when you have that many people, there's diseases, people die. So that's why they have the crematorium. Now, the gas chamber is a little more difficult to explain. So it was blown up. So the map says it was here, and the workmen tell me it was here, and it's about the right size, and there's this big wall that is out here doing nothing, holding up these weird little things. I think that what these things are joist hangers to hold up the ceiling, and there must have been some other wall here. And there are signs of a foundation. There's a foundation here. A pretty big wall used to be here. Very sneaky. Just like gateways, just like Little Company of Mary, where security guard threw me out and put his hand over the camera to try to get rid of the evidence, refused to tell me his name. When I tried to film his ID badge, he just covered up the camera. Very sneaky. If they're doing everything legal, if they're totally innocent, why do they have to destroy the evidence? Why did the security guard at Little Company of Mary refuse to tell me his name? Why did he put the camera over? Why did he put his hand over the camera? Why is it that the woman, her name is Michelle, when she found out that I had a camera and I was trying to film everything, she called me on the phone of this payphone and said, I just called the police. They're coming now to take you to jail. And I said, great, I would love to have some cops on one of my films. I want to put some music like, what you gonna do when they come for you, bad boys, bad boys. That ought to get me a lot of viewers to see my films. Cops on my film, that'd be great. But unfortunately, the cops never came. A woman named Dr. Roberts says, no, the police are not coming. Michelle didn't call the police. She's just scared. She's just scared of you and wants you to go away. So that's why she said that, but there's no police coming. Very sneaky. Then all these wonderful films, they were all destroyed by the Del Amo staff. They didn't want films about mental hospitals coming out on YouTube. See that lake over there? It was used partly as a moat so that the women wouldn't escape. The rest of the perimeter had these like X's, these jacks. And they weren't posts, sort of like crosses, like St. Andrew's crosses. And it was used to support lots and lots of wires, electrified wires. Every wire there had electricity. The women used to call it the electric wall because it was just electricity running there. Some women try to kill themselves by throwing themselves against that wall. And right here is the crematorium. They didn't blow it up. Usually in these camps, when they heard the Russians coming, they would blow up the crematorium. But there's the chimney, it's still there. And inside of the ovens by Toff and Sons, the creators of the Jewish Memorial. So it's locked, can't get in there. But there it is. There's one. It's hard to tell. This is one. Shade it right here. There's one gas chamber. I mean, not gas chamber. I mean, one oven right here, crematorium oven. And there's another one over here. Yeah, there it is. So the Nazis didn't blow it up, didn't destroy it. So they're still there. And I guess this is why they have this steel door, so that no modern day Nazis try to blow it up. These places are always in great danger of being destroyed by skinheads, modern day Nazis, who don't want the public to see these things. So they have to have guards in these places. Even though it's glass, it's made so that if somebody breaks the glass, the rest is steel bars, they can't get in. Otherwise, modern Nazis will try to destroy this crematorium so they can say that it never happened. Oh, Jews were never killed. Women were never killed. It's all a lie they want to say. Yeah, just like the psychiatrists who say, oh, he's crazy. He's delusional. He thinks that we're keeping political prisoners here. But don't listen to him. He's crazy. He's nuts. There are certain people who will say that it was this Congressman Stephen Horn. I think I suspect that he wrote a fake letter from somebody named Guy Lewis. And I looked it up, and he was supposed to be the director of the Department of Justice. I looked it up on the internet. There's no Guy Lewis that works there at all. So I think Congressman Stephen Horn just made up the name so that it would appear as if I had a fair trial. This letter that I think Congressman Stephen Horn wrote said that I had received a fair trial, that I'm lying, that it's not true, that I was convicted fairly, that I all this stuff that my public defender framed me up. He says that's not true. Public defender didn't lie, and said that I did get a jury trial, and all my eyewitnesses were allowed to testify. All that is George Bullshit. That didn't happen. He just wants to say that all of these terrible things didn't happen. These are the kind of people who will try to blow up this crematorium if they had a chance, so that they can say it never happened. Now, there were people that lived across that. Well, there are still people that live across that lake. Okay, you can't see it because the houses are behind those trees. And they would say that we knew nothing what was going on there. They said that they knew that it was a prison for women, but they didn't hear anything about the crematorium. You know, they would go swimming there at the lake, and the crematorium is right there, right? They knew what was going on, but they say we knew nothing. They said all we could hear were the dogs barking all the time. All the time was dogs were barking, and those dogs were tearing up the women. Any woman that panicked, got scared, ran away from the work detail, she got chewed up by the dogs. And these people on the other side said, yeah, they just heard those dogs barking all the time, day and night, but they didn't think anything was going on. There they are, the rocks. The rocks placed on top of a monument, which is a reminder that there were Jewish families that lost loved ones here at Ravensbrück. And this is a small monument reminding us that it wasn't just the women that were killed. What about the children? When they gather large numbers of women, of course there's going to be a lot of little children. And so you must remember that it wasn't just the women that were killed. A lot of children were killed. But there's something strange about Ravensbrück. Not all the children were killed. Sure, millions, hundreds of thousands of children were killed, yeah, but some were not. Which is unusual because in Auschwitz, children didn't survive. Only the last few that hadn't been killed were rescued by the Russian army when they marched in. Mostly twins because Dr. Mengele was using them as guinea pigs to do experiments. And horrible, horrible experiments, just as if they were just rats. Experiment on them, cutting things out and opening the brains open and killing the other twin to compare if the brain is the same or stuff like that. Horrible things. But here, not all children were killed. Some of them were held in a special prison far way at the other side. It was called the education camp. It's like education. It's a prison for kids. But of course, they want to fool the public by saying that they were just children being educated. They're doing something very wonderful, charitable, helpful. It's just like the psychiatrists and the nurses at all the mental hospitals. They say, Mrs. Sanchez, we don't want to hurt you. We want to help you. You're so lucky to be getting such expensive medication for free. Oh, you don't understand. Everything is to make you feel better and make you feel wonderful. I don't know why you think we're trying to hurt you. We're not trying to hurt you. That's just George Bush. They say it again and again. I've been drugged in mental hospitals over 20 times, 30 times in the last 23 years. When has it made me feel better? It's never made me feel better. Every time they drug me, I hate the psychiatrist more, and I dream more about killing them. I dream more about blowing up the mental hospitals, and that's what the medication does. They don't want to hear that, but that's what the medication does. So how can that help me feel better and feel wonderful and do all these great things for me? It's just George Bush. And this is what the Russian army discovered when they marched in here, because the Germans lost the war. If they had won the war, Ravensbrück would have been an example of how wonderful the Germans are and how they help people and make them feel wonderful, and they don't want to hurt the Jews. Oh, the Jews are so lucky to be in a country where they're treated so well. Oh, the Jews are living in the most wonderful country in the world, that they love Jews more than anybody in the whole world. That's what would have happened if they had won the war. It's only because they lost the war that all their stuff was hanging out and everybody knew the truth. I don't want the United States to lose any wars, of course, but if the United States were to lose the war, everything I'm saying now would become obvious. It would be just history, and that it happened. No matter how many people tried to destroy the evidence, it happened. Read my book, The Mother of All Evidence, available through the Amazon Kindle store or through my blogs at Facebook, MySpace, and DeviantArt.